What if I told you that everything you believed about the majestic pharaohs was just a beautiful cover for a cruel reality? We are used to seeing ancient Egypt as a land of pyramid builders, wise priests, and endless gold frozen in time. But behind this glamour lay one of the most deadly and disciplined military machines of the ancient world, one that knew no mercy. Their empire was not held together by prayers to the gods, but by the sharpness of bronze blades and the rumble of war chariots sweeping away everything in their path. The Egyptians turned warfare into an exact science. They did not simply conquer their neighbors. They created systems of oppression and control that were thousands of years ahead of their time. It was a civilization that was the first to understand that true power lies not only in the size of an army, but also in the ability to command it. Their tactics were full of cunning, deception, and unexpected engineering solutions that stumped their enemies. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how one simple but ingenious trick with sand could blind an entire army and bring victory to the pharaoh without a single sword stroke.
The true battle is not with the sword, but here, in the mind. Disseminate the scrolls. Let fear.
Are you ready to learn the truth about how battles were won before they even began? Egyptian strategists understood perfectly well that control over the enemy's mind sometimes decided the outcome of a war faster than any weapon. Therefore, they sought to influence the fears of the enemy long before the clash. Their armies used sound not as a decoration for marching, but as a striking force. This method was part of a state military doctrine that had been formed over centuries. The Egyptians made psychology as much a tool as a spear or shield. The Egyptians knew that the will of an army could be broken even before the ranks converged. They observed nature, heard the roar of the desert winds, and incorporated these phenomena into their combat practices. Sound became the main weapon, transformed into a means of intimidation. Huge drums beat out a rhythm that was calculated mathematically. This rumble was felt by the skin, not just the ears. It became part of the battlefield long before the attack began. Imagine the deafening roar of hundreds of blows spreading across the desert plain like waves on water. Fine sand particles jumped on the ground, trembling under the vibrations. Enemy scouts heard this approach long before they saw the Egyptian banners. Rumors of such marches spread like wildfire. For many tribes, it was a harbinger of disaster. This rhythm was never chaotic. It was created by specially trained people who spent years in military ensembles. Each drummer knew his role as well as a spearman knew his stance. Huge battle trumpets amplified this roar. They were made of wood, copper, and even silver in the case of the pharaoh's ceremonial troops. For the unprepared enemy, this cacophonous orchestra sounded like an omen of death. People saw not an army, but the embodiment of elemental forces. Many people's psyches broke down long before the battle. Panic spread from one soldier to another like wildfire. The army turned into a mob. The Egyptians used this skillfully. The Egyptian warriors themselves moved in complete silence. They did not shout or try to intimidate with their voices. Their formation, smooth and motionless, was more frightening than any scream. Drums and trumpets created a sound backdrop, while the silence of the warriors created an emotional vacuum. This contrast had a stronger effect on the enemy than any shout. It said, "We control ourselves, we control you." For barbarian tribes accustomed to loud battle cries, such silence seemed inhuman. Before them stood a wall of people who showed no fear, pain, or doubt. This broke their morale much faster than losses. The Egyptians demonstrated discipline as a weapon, and it worked. Officers commanded their troops using a system of sound signals. The voice could not penetrate the noise, dust, and distance. Therefore, trumpets became the nervous system of the army. Different sounds meant different commands. The army reacted instantly. This gave the Egyptians an incredible tactical advantage. Each trumpet sound had a clear meaning. The signal could give the order to attack or to stop. Soldiers knew these signals as well as craftsmen knew their tools. Lives depended on their accurate understanding. A mistake could cost not only defeat, but an entire army. The enemies usually did not understand the meaning of these sounds. For them, it was chaos. Because of this, they could not predict the actions of the Egyptians. They wasted time trying to understand the movement of troops. As a result, they fell right into the traps that had been set for them. It was this lack of understanding that made Egyptian tactics particularly devastating. In addition to sound, the Egyptians actively used visual intimidation. Their chariots were covered with symbols of gods, lions, falcons, and other sacred animals. These were not only decorations, but also signs of power. Shields and armor were decorated with copper plates that glistened brightly in the sun. The light blinded the enemy and intensified the feeling of impending power. The psychological blow was twofold. The gold and bronze on the Pharaoh's armor shone especially brightly. He looked taller and more powerful than ordinary people. His image emphasized that the Pharaoh was considered a living god. If a god leads an army, who would dare to stop him? The effect was stunning. Faith became a weapon. Such preparation for battle required long and careful coordination. Musicians trained side by side with warriors. They did not just play, but were part of the control mechanism. The loss of one signalman could disrupt the entire formation. Therefore, they were guarded especially carefully. Their role was key. Interestingly, this method of warfare almost eliminated chance. The Egyptians turned the chaos of battle into a predictable process. They did not rely on luck or fury. They created order out of unpredictability, and that made them almost invincible. Their approach was revolutionary. The sound attack was often accompanied by a dust curtain. Chariots deliberately raised clouds of dust to hide the number of troops. The enemy heard the roar, saw the hazy mist, and began to imagine horror stories themselves. They imagined thousands of warriors where there were only hundreds. Fear did its job. Armies fled without ever seeing the enemy. Such tactics required nerves of steel from the Egyptians themselves. Standing under the sound of drums and a rain of arrows was a difficult test. But the discipline of the army worked wonders. People believed in their commanders and in the power of tactics. They knew that order saves lives and panic kills. Guess how long it took to create this perfect weapon? The Egyptians did not invent the chariot. They borrowed it from their worst enemies, the Hyksos, but brought the design to absolute perfection. The Egyptian chariot was a masterpiece of engineering of its time, combining lightness, strength, and incredible maneuverability. Unlike the heavy and unwieldy carts of other peoples, the Egyptian machine was similar to a modern sports car. The main secret was the design of the wheels, which had spokes instead of a solid disc, significantly reducing their weight. The entire chariot weighed so little that two people could easily lift it and carry it over an obstacle or stream. This gave the Egyptian army a strategic mobility that their enemies did not have. They could appear where they were completely unexpected, covering enormous distances in a matter of days. The chariot crew consisted of two people, a driver who controlled the horses and a fighter, usually an archer or spearman. This division of labor allowed the warrior to focus entirely on defeating targets, while the driver maneuvered across the battlefield. The pair had to have perfect mutual understanding because their lives depended on it. The tactics of using chariots resembled those of modern light cavalry or even tank wedges. They did not ram into the infantry formation head-on, as this would have been suicidal for their light construction. Instead, they circled around the enemy formation. The axle of the chariot was set far back, which gave it high stability when turning and allowed it to make sharp maneuvers. The wide track prevented the vehicle from overturning even on the uneven terrain of the desert. Woven floors were used for shock absorption, which springy and softened the jolting. Special attention was paid to the training of horses, which were a valuable resource and cost a fortune. Egyptian horses were short but incredibly hardy and fast, capable of running for long distances on hot sand. The loss of a horse in battle was considered a serious loss, often more significant than the loss of an ordinary soldier. Chariots were often used to pursue a retreating enemy, preventing them from regrouping. They turned an organized retreat into a panicked flight, destroying the remnants of the enemy army. It was an instrument of total domination in open terrain. In addition, chariots served as mobile platforms for commanders, from which they could see the battlefield and give orders. The pharaoh was always depicted on a chariot, leading his army into battle, which had enormous ideological significance. It was a symbol of power, speed, and the inevitability of punishment. Chariot workshops were the first state-owned factories with division of labor and standardization of parts. Replaceable axles, spokes, and drawbars allowed for quick repairs in the field. It was a real military industry working for victory. But even the most sophisticated equipment is useless without reliable supplies and logistics. In the next chapter, you will learn what really sustained the power of the Egyptian army, apart from wheels. What I am about to show you is banned in 12 countries as an example of inhuman endurance. We are used to talking about battles, but we forget that war is, above all, the exhausting labor of moving thousands of people. The Egyptian army made marches across scorching deserts, where the temperature of the sand could melt the soles of their shoes. The secret of their survival and combat effectiveness lay in a unique system of logistics and equipment. Every Egyptian soldier was not only a warrior but also a porter, carrying supplies of water and food. Their main footwear was sandals woven from papyrus or leather, which wore out quickly on rocky ground. Therefore, there was an entire industry of weaving shoes right on the march, and soldiers often carried spare pairs on their belts. Water was the most valuable resource, and its distribution was controlled more strictly than the issuance of weapons. Special detachments of water carriers with leather wineskins moved along with the column, ensuring the minimum necessary level of hydration. Officers knew the location of all oases and wells along the route, and the route was always planned from water source to water source. The soldiers' food was simple but high in calories: grain cakes, dried fish, onions, and garlic. These foods did not spoil in the heat and provided enough energy for long marches. Onions and garlic also served as natural antiseptics, preventing intestinal infections in unsanitary conditions. The organization of the camp for the night was worked out to perfection and took a minimum of time. In a matter of hours, a fortified city with a clear street layout and a guarded perimeter would spring up in the desert. Shields were used not only in battle, but also as elements of temporary fences around the commander's tents. An interesting detail was the accounting and bureaucracy system that accompanied the army on every campaign. Scribes carefully recorded every measure of grain and every pair of sandals issued, keeping strict accounts of state resources. This prevented theft and ensured the fair distribution of supplies. Medical care on the march was surprisingly advanced for the time. Doctors accompanied the army, carrying supplies of ointments, bandages, and medicinal herbs to treat heat stroke and abrasions. The health of a soldier was a state asset that had to be protected. The Egyptians used ships on the Nile to transport heavy cargo and provisions as far as possible. The river was the main transport artery, allowing huge resources to be moved without exhausting people and animals. The Egyptian army's ability to arrive at the enemy's borders, fresh and ready for battle, was the result of this titanic work behind the scenes. Enemies often expected to see people exhausted from the journey, but instead encountered orderly ranks of warriors at full strength. This was a strategic advantage that won wars. If you enjoy learning about these hidden details of history, be sure to like this video. It will help us create even more content about the secrets of ancient civilization. Are you ready for the shocking truth about a weapon that looks like a farming tool? The symbol of Egyptian military power was the hopsh, a unique sickle-shaped sword that struck terror into the hearts of the pharaoh's enemies. It was not a sword in the usual sense of medieval knighthood, but a complex tool for a special style of combat. Its curved blade allowed not only for cutting, but also for tactical maneuvers that were impossible with a straight blade. The hopsh was cast entirely from bronze, which made it an incredibly durable and heavy weapon. Its shape evolved from battle axes, retaining their penetrating power and cutting balance. A blow with such a sword could easily split an enemy's helmet or break through their shield due to the inertia of the curved part. But the main trick of the hopch was its hook on the outside of the blade. An experienced warrior could use this bend to hook the edge of an enemy's shield and open it up for a strike with a sharp jerk. This made Egyptian infantry extremely dangerous in close combat against enemies protected by shields. The hook could also be used to catch an enemy's leg or the reins of his horse, throwing them off balance. This turned fencing into a brutal struggle where every movement was aimed at depriving the enemy of stability. The hopch required great physical strength and long training to use effectively. Unlike piercing swords, the hopch inflicted terrible lacerations, which were often fatal given the state of ancient medicine. The psychological effect of such a weapon was enormous, as it was associated with execution and the power of the pharaoh. The hopch's hilt often had no guard, forcing warriors to rely on their shield to protect their hand. This dictated an aggressive fighting style where the best defense was continuous attack and pressure on the enemy. Carrying a hopch was a privilege reserved for experienced warriors and elite units of the pharaoh's guard. Recruits were usually armed with spears or maces, which were easier to manufacture and master. The hopch was a sign of status and professionalism. Interestingly, over time, the hopch became a ceremonial weapon symbolizing victory over the forces of chaos. Its images are often found on the walls of temples, where the pharaoh raises this sword above the heads of his defeated enemies. But in battle, it remained a purely practical instrument of murder. Bronze casting technology allowed swords to be created with different hardness characteristics on the blade and butt. This prevented the weapon from breaking when striking hard objects. Egyptian armorers were true masters of metallurgy. Bronze was softer than iron, so swords had to be frequently repaired and sharpened during campaigns. How effective do you think such a weapon would be against medieval steel? In the next chapter, we will talk about what allowed the Egyptians to defeat their enemies without engaging in hand-to-hand combat. The appearance of the composite bow in the Egyptian army was a real technological revolution, comparable to the invention of gunpowder. Before that, the Egyptians used simple wooden bows, which had limited range and penetrating power. The new technology, also borrowed from their Asian neighbors. The design of the composite bow was incredibly complex and required months of painstaking work by a master craftsman. It consisted of several layers of different materials: wood, horn, and animal tendons, glued together with a special fish glue. This combination of materials worked like a spring, storing enormous energy when drawn. The range of such a bow reached hundreds of meters, which allowed the Egyptians to shoot at the enemy long before direct contact. An arrow fired from such a weapon could pierce light armor or a shield, leaving the enemy's infantry no chance. This gave a tremendous tactical advantage in open spaces. Egyptian archers were trained in archery from an early age and achieved incredible speed and accuracy. The density of fire was such that contemporaries described the sky darkening from clouds of arrows. A massive volley from thousands of archers could stop a cavalry attack or break the infantry formation in a matter of minutes. Arrow production was streamlined and reached industrial scale, as ammunition consumption was enormous. The arrowheads were cast from bronze and had a special three-bladed shape for better aerodynamics and penetration. The arrow shaft was carefully balanced for flight accuracy. Archers often operated in mixed units with infantry, who covered them with shields from return fire. This tactic of cooperation between different branches of the military was advanced for its time. Chariots also used composite bows, turning them into mobile firing points. The storage and maintenance of such bows required special conditions, as the glue and tendons were sensitive to moisture. The bows were stored in special cases and regularly serviced to maintain their elasticity. It was a capricious but deadly weapon of professionals. Tensioning a powerful composite bow required extraordinary physical strength and a special technique. The skeletons of archers of that time have characteristic deformations of the shoulder girdle and spine bones. This was the price they paid for mastering the most long-range weapon of the era. The Egyptian strategy was based on inflicting maximum damage from a distance while minimizing their own losses. They turned war into a shootout, where the winner was the one with the most powerful bow and the most arrows. It was a pragmatic approach by a civilization that valued resources. Commanders directed the archers' fire, concentrating it on the most dangerous areas of the enemy formation or on enemy commanders. The targeted elimination of leaders often led to the disorganization of the entire enemy army. The composite bow remained the king of the battlefield for many centuries. What if everything you've been taught about armor is outdated? We're used to seeing warriors clad in metal in movies, but in reality, such armor would be a deadly trap under the Egyptian sun. Metal heated up quickly, turning the warrior's body into a hot oven. The Egyptians understood perfectly well that battle was not only about striking power, but also endurance. Therefore, they sought a material that would protect but not kill from the heat. Their choice fell on linen. The Egyptians used linen not as a fabric, but as a structural material. They took many layers and glued them together with natural resins. The result was a dense composite that became rigid after drying. Such armor could bend but not break, providing protection in a wide variety of situations. Its strength surprised even modern researchers. It was truly the prototype of Kevlar. The multiple layers acted as a shock absorber. Each layer absorbed part of the impact, reducing the force exerted on the body. Clubs, stone axes, and throwing spears lost their effectiveness. Arrows could get stuck in the fabric without piercing it completely. The enemy saw the soft fabric and underestimated its capabilities. This made linen armor an even more dangerous weapon in the hands of the Egyptians. Flexibility was particularly important. Unlike metal armor, linen armor did not restrict movement. Soldiers could run, bend over, and turn their bodies without the risk of their chest being crushed. This gave them a huge advantage in close combat. The lightweight fabric construction made warriors agile and maneuverable. They did not tire as quickly as their opponents in metal armor. But the main advantage of linen armor was its ability to breathe. The fabric allowed air to pass through, allowing the body to cool down. In 40-degree heat, this meant the difference between life and heat stroke. The Egyptians could fight for hours, while their enemies were exhausted within tens of minutes. Protection from overheating became a decisive factor. Metal, on the other hand, became a death sentence. Under the sun, it heated up so much that it could burn the skin. Warriors in bronze were forced to constantly seek shade, otherwise they would lose consciousness. The Egyptians understood this weakness and always sought to prolong the battle. Their lightness was a weapon that did not require metal. They fought with endurance, not the weight of their armor. The production of linen armor was simple and widespread. Flax grew in abundance along the Nile, and its processing was a classic craft. Bonding the layers did not require rare materials that had to be mined or imported. This made it possible to supply large armies with the same protection. The Egyptian infantry became uniform and disciplined. The availability of linen armor made it the main tool of the mass army. While other societies supplied only the elite, Egypt could protect every ordinary soldier. The army became more equal. Every soldier knew that his life did not depend on the amount of metal in the country. This boosted morale. For the elite, improved versions were created. The linen base was reinforced with bronze scales. They were sewn tightly, overlapping each other. Such armor was stronger but retained all the advantages of fabric. It shone in the sun, showing the status of the warrior. But at the same time, it did not turn him into a hot cauldron. Elite armor combined flexibility and protection. The scales did not hinder movement and bent with the body. They reflected the slashing blows from above that were common in battle. The shoulders and chest became virtually impenetrable. The enemy saw the gleaming armor and understood that they were facing an experienced warrior. This influenced the psychology of the battle. The shape of the linen armor was carefully thought out. The torso was completely covered, while the arms remained free. Shoulder pads protected against blows from above. Sometimes a leather apron was added to protect the groin and thighs. The armor followed the shape of the body and did not interfere with spear work. Shields complemented this defense system. The Egyptians made them from wood and oxhide, stretching it so tightly that it became almost stone-like. The shields were light but durable. Their rounded top helped soldiers look out without exposing their heads. They served as the first line of defense. Armor was the last line of defense. Interestingly, this technology was later adopted by the Greeks. Their linothoraxes were direct descendants of Egyptian armor. This proves the effectiveness of the material and design. Europe learned from Egypt, not the other way around. Simple linen proved to be stronger than complex solutions. It was a victory for engineering. Linen armor was easy to maintain. If it tore, it could be sewn right in the field. No oil, polishing, or lengthy preparations were required. This made life much easier for the warriors. They could travel long distances. Light armor allowed the Egyptians to march quickly. They could perform rapid maneuvers, evade pursuit, and attack suddenly. Metal armor did not allow for this. It slowed them down, exhausted them, and required rest. The Egyptians ran, they did not hobble. Their armies lived in the rhythm of the desert. What about the fact that the Egyptians knew not only how to defend themselves, but also how to storm the most impregnable walls? In the next chapter, you will learn how cities were destroyed. Storming fortified cities was one of the most difficult tasks for any ancient army, but the Egyptians approached this issue with their characteristic engineering ingenuity. They did not rely solely on brute force and ladders. They developed sophisticated siege technologies. One such technology was the use of sappers to undermine walls. Egyptian engineers were able to identify weak spots in the foundations of walls and dig hidden tunnels to collapse them. This required precise calculations to ensure that the tunnel did not collapse prematurely and emerged in the right place. Fire was set under the wooden supports in the tunnel. Mobile siege towers and battering rams with canopies were used to protect the attackers from arrows and stones. These structures were covered with wet skins to prevent them from being set on fire by the defenders of the fortress. Under the cover of such machines, the infantry could approach the gates or walls for a direct attack. The Egyptians also built mounds of earth and sand to level the height of the city walls. Thousands of soldiers carried baskets of soil, raising the ground level day after day. When the mound reached the top of the wall, the assault turned into a normal battle on level ground. Blockade was another effective, albeit lengthy, method of capturing fortresses. The Egyptians surrounded the city with a tight ring of fortifications, cutting it off from water and food. They could wait for months until hunger forced the garrison to surrender. An interesting detail was the use of psychological pressure during the siege. The Egyptians could display the heads of slain enemies or carry out demonstrative executions in front of the walls. This undermined the morale of the besieged and inclined them to surrender. The Egyptians themselves were masters of fortification and built impregnable fortresses, such as Buchan in Nubia. These fortresses had complex systems of moats, double walls, and bastions that allowed for crossfire. Knowing how to build defenses helped them understand how to break them. The Navy also played an important role in the siege of coastal cities or cities on the Nile. Ships blocked the supply of provisions from the water and could land troops behind enemy lines. The interaction between the army and the navy was a distinctive feature of the Egyptian military machine. Reconnaissance before an assault was mandatory. Spies infiltrated the city to find out the size of the garrison and the state of supplies. This information allowed commanders to choose the right tactics: assault, siege, or negotiation. The capture of a city always ended with the seizure of rich spoils, which were distributed among the soldiers and temples. This served as a powerful motivation for soldiers to climb the walls under a hail of stones. Every assault was a risky undertaking, but the reward was worth it.
For your bravery honors the double crown.
The Egyptian army was not a monolithic mass of ethnic Egyptians. It actively used mercenaries and conquered peoples. This system allowed the pharaohs to preserve their own population for agriculture and large-scale public works. Egypt understood that armies needed flexibility, which could not be achieved by relying solely on local soldiers. Therefore, inviting foreigners became part of state policy. This was not considered a weakness, but rather a sign of wisdom. Mercenary troops became the foundation of military strategy. It was a pragmatic policy. Why lose your own people when you can pay foreigners? Many nations willingly entered service, as Egyptian gold was coveted in all regions. Mercenaries received food, housing, and a status they did not have in their homeland. For them, serving the pharaoh was a chance for a new life. Egypt, in turn, received experienced warriors. This exchange was beneficial to both sides. Nubian archers, known for their incredible accuracy, were elite light infantry units. From the southern territories, the Nubians brought the tradition of long-range shooting. Their bows were more powerful than the Egyptian ones, and their arrows flew faster and straighter. They were distinguished by their agility and endurance, which made them indispensable in reconnaissance. They were feared by many enemies of Egypt. Archers from Nubia became legendary. The Sherdun, representatives of the mysterious peoples of the sea, occupied a special place. Once they themselves threatened Egypt, but after their defeat, some of their leaders agreed to serve the pharaoh. Egypt managed to turn its enemies into a personal guard. The Sherdun were distinguished by their horned helmets, round shields, and straight swords. They quickly gained a reputation as brave fighters. Their presence inspired fear. After their defeat, many of them entered the pharaoh's service and became part of his elite. They were valued for their desperate courage and ability to fight without fear. They took part in the most risky operations that required personal bravery. Over time, the Sherdun received special honors. They were called the pharaoh's shield. They guarded the ruler even in peacetime. Libyan tribes also provided light infantry and charioteers. These peoples lived on the western borders and were excellent scouts. They knew the desert better than many Egyptians. Their lightness and maneuverability made them reliable allies. They served as auxiliary troops. Egypt skillfully used these skills. The use of different ethnic groups allowed the Egyptians to combine different fighting styles and tactics. Each people brought their own methods of warfare. This made the army more flexible and unpredictable. The Egyptians could change the structure of their army to suit a specific enemy. Such an army was a living organism. Mercenaries were often used in garrisons on distant frontiers. They served on the borders, where there were fewer temptations to participate in conspiracies. This allowed the Egyptian authorities to keep the center more stable. Outsiders had no ties to the local population. This reduced the risk of uprisings. Loyalty was bought with gold. Their loyalty was indeed based on payment and privileges. They were given land, housing, and the opportunity to live better than at home. Patriotism was not expected of them. The main thing was that they followed orders. This system proved to be effective.
We made the right choice serving the pharaoh.
The integration of foreign warriors was so successful that some attained high positions. They became officers, advisors, and confidants of the ruler. This was unusual for the ancient world. Egypt allowed talented people to climb the social ladder. This attracted even more warriors. The empire seemed to absorb them. It was a social ladder for barbarians willing to serve the empire. Many saw service as a ticket to a new life. They received the protection of the state. Their children could become part of Egyptian society. This mixing of cultures strengthened the army. Egypt was becoming a multinational power. However, there was also a strict system of control. Mercenary troops were always led by Egyptian officers. This ruled out the possibility of mutiny. The pharaoh's orders were carried out without question. Discipline was the same for everyone, and no amount of glory granted any privileges. The policy of divide and rule was also applied within the army. Different units often competed with each other. They sought to demonstrate their valor and receive rewards. This competition did not turn into conflict, but stimulated new heroes. The Egyptians masterfully managed this system. Victories became a common cause. The presence of professional mercenaries allowed the pharaoh to have a permanent army at his disposal. Peasants did not have to be pulled from the fields in the middle of the harvest. The economy did not suffer as a result. The army remained combat-ready even in peacetime. Mercenaries ensured stability. Egypt could fight at any moment. The Sherdani and Nubians became part of the image of the new kingdom army. Their images can be found on steles and in temples. They fought alongside the Egyptians, sharing in the glory of victory. Their loyalty was sometimes higher than that of the local elite. They served honestly and devotedly. This strengthened the pharaoh's power. Using foreign experience allowed the Egyptians to quickly adapt to new threats. If an enemy appeared with new tactics, the pharaoh hired those who knew how to neutralize them. Thus, Egypt learned from everyone but remained in control. This model saved the empire from many dangers. It turned the army into a tactician. The Battle of Kadesh between the armies of Ramses II and the Hittite Empire became one of the most documented events of antiquity. But few people know that it began with a spectacular failure of intelligence and a brilliant disinformation operation by the Hittites. Hittite spies, pretending to be defectors, convinced the pharaoh that the enemy was far to the north. Believing the false information, Ramses stretched his troops out on the march, moving toward the city with only Amun's advance corps. He did not know that the huge army of the Hittite king Muwatalli II was hiding just behind the hills of the old city of Kadesh. It was a classic trap which the Egyptian god king walked into. A surprise attack by Hittite heavy chariots on Ramses' second corps, the Ra corps, led to its complete destruction. The soldiers were caught off guard on the march, before they had time to form battle lines. The Hittites broke through the formation and rushed towards the Egyptian camp, where the pharaoh himself was located. It seemed that disaster was inevitable, and that Ramses would be captured or killed. However, the iron discipline of the Egyptian guard and the personal bravery or desperation of the pharaoh played a role here. Ramses was able to organize the defense of the camp and rally the remnants of his troops around him. The key moment was the arrival of reinforcements. The Nahrain detachment, which approached from another direction and struck the Hittites in the flank. The Hittites, busy looting the Egyptian camp, lost their formation and became easy prey. The Egyptian light chariots proved to be more maneuverable than the heavy Hittite machines in close combat and rough terrain. They shot down their slow-moving enemies without engaging in close combat. The Hittites were forced to retreat behind the city walls, suffering huge losses. This battle demonstrated the importance of reconnaissance and the danger of underestimating the enemy. But it also demonstrated the ability of the Egyptian military machine to recover from a terrible blow and seize the initiative. It was a lesson in crisis management on the battlefield. Official Egyptian propaganda declared Kadesh a great victory for Ramses, although strategically the situation remained a stalemate. The walls of the temples were covered with images of the pharaoh's triumph, concealing the fact that he had narrowly escaped death. History is written by the victors. Subsequently, the first peace treaty in history was concluded between Egypt and the Hittites, which has survived to this day. Both empires realized that they could not destroy each other and decided to divide their spheres of influence. The Battle of Kadesh remains a textbook example of tactics, showing how one mistake in reconnaissance can cost an army and how resilience can save an empire.
Your service strengthens the Black Land. All of Egypt witnesses your valor this day.
The Egyptian army was held together not only by fear of punishment, but also by a powerful system of rewards. The pharaohs understood that soldiers should not fight blindly. They should know what they are risking their lives for. Therefore, they created a sophisticated reward system, one of the first in history. Rewards raised the prestige of service. They bound the warrior to the state. Egypt turned bravery into social capital. The pharaohs clearly understood that bravery must be rewarded. Without this, the army would not be truly loyal. That is why special awards were created, which were given only to the most deserving. They raised the status of heroes in the eyes of the whole society. These symbols of valor quickly became coveted. Their owners became famous throughout the country. The most honorable award was the Gold of Valor. It could be gold flies, lions, or richly decorated necklaces. Such signs distinguished a person from all others. They were worn with pride and were not taken off even in peacetime. They served as a constant reminder of the feat. Why flies? The Egyptians saw in this insect a tenacity that seemed almost magical to them. A fly cannot be completely driven away. It always returns. Therefore, a warrior was compared to an inexorable force that knew no fear. A warrior who received golden flies was recognized as fearless and persistent. It was not just an award, but a recognition of character. Such a fighter was considered especially valuable to the army. He was respected by both officers and ordinary soldiers. His persistence became legendary. The award became a symbol of courage. The awarding ceremony was held in public. This was done specifically to show the entire army that the feat did not go unnoticed. The pharaoh could personally throw gold jewelry to his heroes from the balcony of the palace. Such a sight was remembered for a lifetime. Soldiers saw that their labor was rewarded. Such ceremonies turned into a real spectacle. The pharaoh's participation gave the moment a sacred meaning. The hero was considered a person worthy of the attention of the god king. This inspired and commanded respect. After the award ceremony, the soldier returned to the ranks a different person. In addition to gold, veterans received land grants. This was the most valuable gift in an agrarian country. Land provided stability and income. A veteran could provide for his family and live comfortably for the rest of his life. Such people became an important pillar of the state. They were grateful to the pharaoh. Tax exemption was another privilege. It freed veterans from heavy obligations to the treasury. This gesture showed that the state respected their contribution. The attitude towards soldiers became more humane. They felt needed. Officers could count on receiving slaves from among prisoners of war. This significantly increased their wealth. Slaves did the hard work on the farm. Officers could focus on service and training. War became the fastest way to rise in society. Such growth attracted talented people. There was also collective loot, which was divided after victory. The loot included metals, fabrics, statuettes, and livestock. Part of it was sent to temples as a thank you to the gods. The rest was distributed according to rank and merit. Even ordinary soldiers left with a reward. Victory was felt as a common achievement. Scribe kept accurate records of each feat. They recorded names and circumstances. This made the system fair. No one could take credit for the achievements of others. Every soldier knew that his actions would be seen and evaluated. Bureaucracy served justice. There were punishments for cowardice, but the Egyptians preferred rewards. They believed that respect and rewards were more powerful than fear. Loss of honor was the most terrible punishment. It cast a shadow on the whole family. It was almost impossible to wash away such a mark of shame. Therefore, soldiers feared not pain, but shame. This system created a professional military elite. It was bound to the pharaoh by personal loyalty. The military gained high status and influence. They became the most important political force. Even priests took their opinion into account. Egypt built its state on the strength and loyalty of the army. Awards were not just decorations. They became a pass to the peaceful elite. A golden fly could open doors that were closed to ordinary people. It spoke of valor confirmed by the pharaoh himself. This brought respect and honor. The hero became a person who was listened to. We have seen that behind the golden mass of the pharaohs and the majestic pyramids lay a cold and calculating military machine. Egyptian tactics were a mixture of advanced technology, ruthless discipline, and a deep understanding of the enemy's psychology. They knew how to fight not with numbers, but with skill, turning their weaknesses into strengths and adapting other people's inventions to their needs. From the roar of drums to deadly chariots, from desert logistics to mercenary diplomacy, everything was subordinated to one goal: domination. Which Egyptian tactic did you find most impressive? Was it psychological terror through sound, or the engineering genius of chariot design? Or perhaps you were surprised by the persistence of the golden flies? Write your opinion in the comments, suggest topics for future videos, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. History still holds many secrets